Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Will My PPP Loan Be Forgiven? Update number 7. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Brian Schill, and I'm the Executive Director for the Peters Township Chamber of Commerce. A little bit about the Chamber. Our mission is to provide connections, opportunities, partnerships, and resources to grow our businesses and serve our communities. We promote, advocate, connect, and educate. In addition to Peters, our area of coverage also includes the entire South Hills and northern Washington County. Joining us again this week is Steve McCarron from Community Bank. He's brought with him special guest Gary Kissinger from the accounting firm of Palermo Kissinger Associates. Thanks for joining us today, gentlemen.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us, Brian.
Just as a reminder, why are we doing this? I think most of you probably know we continuously receive questions regarding PPP. The guidance changes by the minute, it seems like, so there's always something new. Just a little Zoom 101. We ask everyone to please remain muted during the entire update to eliminate background noise. This webinar is being recorded and will be available later on our website. If you do have a question, please feel free to use the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. So at this point, take it away, Steve.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Glad to be back with you again this morning. And we switched, or we delayed having this last week, and I think we're all glad we did, in that the SBA has come out with a variety of new information regarding forgiveness since last Wednesday. And in fact, on Monday, they came out with some additional guidance for those of us trying to process these loans, trying to help people understand what's involved. And thus, I think our phone call today will be very beneficial to all those who are listening. I also have to say that as I've listened to some of the webinars we've done in the past, there are things that I've said that I cringe about, and there's other things that I've said that I'm like, yeah, I was right on. So as we go through this today, always keep in mind that the rules could change again, but we're doing the best we can with the information we have at our fingertips as of today. So normally I'd like to start off with my five most important bullet points from the last time we spoke. And the first bullet point would be that, and I think a lot of you know this, is that the SBA has now come out with a new forgiveness application. And the new forgiveness application is broken into basically, there's basically two of them now. One of them is considered the EZ application, and the other application is more of a longer form. So now there are two forgiveness applications. My second bullet point is basically that which form you fill out is not dependent on how many employees you have or necessarily how much PPP money you got, but which form you complete is based off of the wages you paid out and the number of employees you said you had. So, for example, if you did not reduce your wages by more than 25% during your covered or alternative period, you would actually complete the EZ form. On the other hand, another side note is that if you said that you had 4 employees at the beginning of the year and during the covered period you maintained 4 employees, you would fill out the EZ form. The third bullet point that I have for everyone today is that, and there's been a lot of debate about this. I've talked to Gary about it. I've talked to other lenders at other banks about this, but we are clear now, or we feel like we're clear now, that you can submit for forgiveness once you've exhausted all of your PPP funds. there was, I think the last time we spoke, I might have said, hey, look, it's 8 weeks or 24 weeks. But just on Monday, in fact, the SBA came out with some of this additional guidance. And in that information, it did become clearer that once you've exhausted all your PPP funds, you can then apply for forgiveness. So if you're, 10 weeks in or 11 weeks in and you've used all your PPP money, you can then apply for forgiveness. You don't have to wait for the full 24 weeks. The fourth bullet point that I thought was important is how much documentation you're actually going to need. On the EZ form that was on the EZ form, there's instructions that are with it. And it's actually a separate document, but there's EZ instructions. And on those instructions, it was, I thought, made much more clearer what type of information people should submit with their application. The fifth point that I'll make this morning, my fifth and final point that I'll make this morning, is that although the SBA has come out with guidance, much clearer, better guidance for you borrowers as far as what you need to do to apply for forgiveness, unfortunately, us bankers are still, let's say, waiting by the phone, so to speak, in regards to what we do with your information. We know that the documentation that you submit to the banks will be held by the banks and not submitted to the SBA. But beyond that, the process that us bankers need to do in order to get people forgiveness, like the actual mechanism, that is actually still fairly unclear to all of us. So that has not been revealed quite yet. So those are my five bullet points from the last time we spoke. I do want to give Gary an opportunity to maybe interject any quick thoughts that he might have.
Yeah, a couple thoughts I have, Steve. When you were going through the process of deciding whether you can do the EZ form, another circumstance would be if you're self-employed and you don't have no employees at all. That's definitely one circumstance where the EZ form would be something that you would do instead of the long form. The other thought process is, and I'm getting this question from so many of our business clients that have the PPP loan, because the 8-week period of time just wasn't going to work for a lot of businesses, because just purely with the formula of 2.5 times your monthly payroll, which is 10, 11 weeks versus an 8-week period, a covered period, there was going to be a shortfall there unless you had significant amount of other eligible non-payroll related expenses. So it is a good thought, a good decision that they would allow you to apply before the end of the 24-week period of time. But there is a caveat there, and the caveat would be that you forego the safe harbor of restoring your payroll by December 31st if you choose to elect to apply before the end of the 24-week period of time. So that might not be the best course of action for all businesses, but in reality, if you're able to use if you restored all your FTEs and they haven't been reduced by greater than 25%, I should say, and you can use it all on payroll costs, go ahead. I would recommend go ahead and apply before the 24-week period of time to get the process started. But that might not be the best fit for everyone, but it is good to know that there's something in between, because a lot of businesses were saying, well, I have to wait until October, November, end of September, October, November, just to submit the application. And then obviously there's going to be a period of time that both the bank reviews the application and it goes to the SBA, and you may not hear about forgiveness for a longer period of time. So the other thought that I've been communicating to a lot of my clients is that to make life simpler, since they're giving you the 24-week period of time, it makes total sense to me to utilize it only on payroll costs. And that makes the application for forgiveness process a lot easier. And I'm sure on your end, Steve, when you get the applications, one payroll report that demonstrates that you used the full amount of the PPP proceeds on eligible costs is a lot easier to review than having to look at utility bills and other eligible expenses. So that's one thing that we've been communicating to our clients, that might be something that they consider. Something else that comes to mind, and I dealt with it yesterday. I had a business client that has a June 30th year end. And so it's a C corporation with June 30th year end. And of course, that's right in the middle of his covered period, and how we're going to handle this. And my recommendation for him was that we pushed off the utilization of the PPP funds until July 1st. And then he was able to use he's able to use that full amount of the proceeds of the loan between July 1st and the end of his 24-week period of time. And it kind of contains both the cost and the forgiveness in next fiscal year. So there's a couple things that just kind of popped up on my radar the last week or so. But like you said, Steve, the interim rules that they passed, that they put out this week, it's a 35-page document, and there's a lot to it. And like we know with the PPP loan, there's more to come. So.
Yeah. It's funny, and I mentioned this to Gary earlier. I've actually read the document twice, and yeah, and stuff I missed the first time, I caught the second time. So, I mean, yeah, these documents, the way if you have questions, start entering your questions into the chat. I'm actually going to start with a question for Gary. And the more and more, Gary, that I look at the forgiveness applications, whether it's the easy form or the long form, I think a general consensus is that, and you kind of just hinted at it a little bit, which is some of these decisions are really, tax strategies or business operation strategies. So what do you advise small businesses to do if they don't have a CPA or an accountant that they feel comfortable with? What would you recommend for those type of businesses?
Yeah, like I said, Steve, I think the change from 8 to 24 weeks really helps tremendously. And, I think the point I made about using it all for payroll costs, that kind of goes along with making things as simple as possible. Don't complicate things. I know everyone's a little bit anxious to try to get this behind us and get the application submitted and have the forgiveness application in place. But definitely, if you could utilize it straight for payroll costs, that would be one thing. And from an accounting standpoint, we get a lot of questions. How do you record these kind of expenses? And we know from a tax standpoint that the forgiveness amount is not going to be taxable income, but also as of now, the expenses are not going to be deductible expenses. So in other words, you wouldn't be able to deduct the same cost on your tax return that you are applying to the PPP loan forgiveness. And getting technical on that, there's a schedule on your federal tax return, business tax return, that itemizes the type of expenses that aren't deductible expenses, and it would be listed there. But just keeping things from a record keeping standpoint as simple as possible, I think would help in the long run.
Yeah, Gary, do me a favor, because that's a question that has actually come up previously from some of our folks that have listened. So clarify for this for me again. So folks that receive forgiveness. So if I got a $20,000 PPP loan and had $20,000 forgiven, will I have to pay taxes on that when I file my taxes in 2021?
No, you won't have to pay tax on the income at all, okay?
Okay.
But what I'm saying is that $20,000 of expenses typically is a deductible expense against your other income. Mm-hmm. And as of now, they won't permit you to utilize that $20,000 of expenses that you use to apply to the loan forgiveness as a deductible expense. So the net effect is it's not taxable. Some people want their cake and eat it too. They want the loan forgiveness amount not to be taxable, but they want to still utilize $20,000 of expenses to apply against other income. And unless they do something different, that's not the case at this point.
Okay, awesome. All right, Brian, I see the questions are pouring in, so I'll let you decipher them, and we'll go from there.
Sounds good. We have a question here. If I receive the first PPP for 10 weeks, can I apply for another one that is a longer period of time? And obviously how to apply for forgiveness between.
So we've certainly, this question has come up on a couple of different fronts. Not only are some business owners a little frustrated that the PPP rules have been relaxed. They might have been 6 or 7 weeks in, and then the government comes out with these relaxed rules, and they're a little frustrated. We've heard that. But then also, I've read recent articles about these states like Arizona, Texas, Florida, where they're being asked to kind of be shut down again. What do the people in those states do? So this has definitely come up a lot. But as of today, you can only apply for one PPP loan. So you cannot apply for a second one. Yeah, I mean, so
Okay.
I don't know, Gary, if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I have heard a few things that they're considering legislation after the 4th of July to potentially, permit a second application, but definitely nothing in place now that would permit you to do that.
Yeah.
Okay. We have a question here. Let's see, from Kim. If I receive an EIDL loan, will this affect forgiveness for the PPP in any way? Also, can I use the EIDL to pay off debt?
So what I know, can I jump in there, Steve?
Go ahead, yeah.
Yeah. The advance that you receive on the EIDL will come off the loan forgiveness amount. So the advance could have been up to $10,000. Some businesses received a $10,000 advance on the EIDL. Some received $1,000 or $1,000 per employee. Whatever that amount of the advance is, when you calculate your loan forgiveness for the PPP, if you receive both the EIDL and the PPP, the advance comes off the amount that's forgiven. And as for the second part of the question related to the EIDL, whether you can use EIDL for, there's a list of eligible expenses for the EIDL. I don't believe you can use it for refinancing. That's one thing I've seen.
Right. Yeah, I've actually looked at EIDL loan documents, and you can make a payment, you can make a loan payment using EIDL funds, but you can't pay off debt with EIDL funds. In regards to the grant, that EIDL grant, and how it gets taken off forgiveness, I'm going to do a follow-up question for Gary. Gary, is it too broad to say, like, if I got a $2,000 EIDL grant, does that automatically mean that I'm going to at least have to pay back $2,000 to the government? Or is there some kind of, as I go through these calculations with number of employees and such, that I might, even though I got that EIDL advance, I might not have to pay it back?
I looked at that a bit, and I'm of the opinion now, based on the information I have, that you would, in that instance, have to pay that $2,000 EIDL advance back, because the EIDL advance I use the example of two businesses with same circumstances calculating their PPP loan forgiveness, and at the end of the process, one business received an EIDL of $2,000 and one didn't. So that $2,000, whatever is calculated, the last step would be reducing that forgiveness by the amount of the idle advance. So I see that as a circumstance that if you get full forgiveness of the PPP loan and you received an idle advance, the idle advance would be the amount that would end up being a loan.
That you'd have to pay back.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Awesome. Awesome. All right, Brian, next one.
All right. Chrissy says, my loan is through U.S. Bank. I have not received the forgiveness application yet. I want to wrap up on June 30th, which is the end of my 8-week period. I've used 93% on payroll. Should the banks be sending them out soon? Now?
Yeah. All right. So that's a good question. And I was going to touch on this, but then I saw, Chrissy, your question pop up. So I thought, okay, I'll just address it now. Most of the banks most of the banks that I've talked to, let's just say that, are going to use an automated system to help folks through the forgiveness process. You'll be able to go to your bank's website and you'll be able to go through this process using an online tool. I don't think many banks are going to have people like they did through the application process, get a forgiveness application, hand fill it out, and submit it. I just, from all the banks I've talked to here in the Pittsburgh area, most seem to be going to be doing some type of automated process where you'll be able to go online, fill out all your information, then upload your documents into this online system, and then kind of go from there. So on one hand, I can see why a bank would not have sent out the applications quite yet, the forgiveness applications. Also, I will say, and Gary and I just talked about, we've mentioned this already, the SBA, with all the various rule changes and such, and in fact, again, we just receiving some good guidance on Monday. I know that there are a lot of banks that are a little gun shy about sending things out due to the fact that they don't want to send out all this information and then potentially have it changed once again. So, I think that once the banks are made aware of what they need to do in order to get people forgiveness, I think at that point you will start to see banks, whether they're going to start emailing out the forgiveness application or whether they're going to contact you and say, hey, we know you might be ready for forgiveness. Go to our website and click on loan, PPP loan forgiveness, and it'll walk you through the process of getting forgiveness. I think once that becomes clear to the banks, I think that will be the trigger for banks to start getting people ready for forgiveness. That's my thought on that. Gary, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
No, I agree. I mean, I know that they stated you have 10 months to apply for forgiveness, but I understand the people were anxious to get that process going and get that letter that says it's forgiven as quickly as possible. So, I know everybody's different, Steve. So,
yeah, and Gary, that's a good point actually, and maybe somebody asked this question and I haven't seen it yet, but I'll just comment on it now, which is right. One of the big changes that the Flexibility Act put into play, and we've talked about it in previous weeks, but I think it's something that you really have to keep in mind, is that the SBA has now given people 10 months to actually apply for forgiveness. So why that is important, I mean, for you, it's important as a business owner because you've got some time to go through this process, but also the SBA knows they gave you 10 months. So it gives them a little bit of time to roll out how this is all going to work. So keep that in mind as well.
Great. Mark says, let's see, how long do you think it will be from the time a business starts the forgiveness process till they get approved? I'm hearing it could be anywhere between 30 to 60 days.
Yeah, Mark, how are you, bud? Hope all is well. Yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, so here's what we know. The bank from when you as a business owner submit your application, which includes all your documentation, you then have the bank then has 60 days to determine and make a recommendation to the SBA in regards to forgiveness. The SBA then has an additional 90 days to actually agree with the bank and then potentially pay off your loan, so to speak. Um, so so that those are the time frames that we're looking at right now. Gary, anything you wanna add there?
No, that's the same time period I see. I mean, I know, same comment. I know people are anxious to get it in place, but I know how many applications are out there, and it's going to be quite a process. And Steve, you have direct contact with SBA, and what kind of feedback are they giving to you as far as, are they prepared for this? That's my question. Are they prepared for this?
So, we've actually, funny enough, the SBA will, I don't know if I should speak for the, off the record or on the record about what the SBA thinks on this, but I will tell you that the bank's federal regulators have basically told us that the SBA is not prepared for this. Now whether that the SBA will agree with that or not is I guess a different story. But look, I want to say at last count, Gary, there were nearly 5 million PPP loan applications. 5 million.
Yeah.
So, I think the SBA, from what we're kind of getting, is the SBA is really going to lean on the banks and their determination of whether someone should get forgiveness or not. They're really going to lean on that probably more times than not. I think there could be certain circumstances that would trigger an SBA review. I mean, certainly anybody over $2 million is going to trigger a review. But if you have a PPP loan under $2 million, unless there's something in the government system that throws up some type of flag, I really think that the SBA is going to lean on our recommendation, and that will drive how quickly they issue the bank's money so these loans can be paid off, and you as a small business owner have your loan forgiven.
Yeah. I guess it goes back to my point about making it as simple as possible when you submit the application for forgiveness, and going back to the point where, do you consider stretching it out longer than the 8-week period of time, so you can only use it for payroll cost to make it easier to when you do submit, versus trying to get it all done within an 8-week period of time and having all these other expenses that you have to document as well.
Yeah, because once you as a business owner submit your loan application for forgiveness, us at the bank, I mean, we still have to look at the stuff and verify it. So it's not like it's a simple pass through. I mean, we still have to look at it and verify it. And so as Gary said, the simpler you make it for the bank, then the quicker we can turn around and say to the SBA, yeah, this whole loan should be forgiven. And then the quicker they'll be able to respond and say, okay, the loan is forgiven. So that's a very good point.
Thanks, gentlemen. All right, Ben says, I have the funds in a separate account in my bank account. I will run payroll for the quarter July 1st next week. Can I pull payroll from the normal account and then transfer funds from my PPP account to the normal account? Or should I run payroll from the PPP account separately?
Yeah, I know from go ahead, Steve.
I say, Gary, that's all you.
Okay. I've been recommending clients keep the money in a separate PPP account if they're able to do so. But I don't recommend that you run the payroll out of that PPP account. I would transfer that amount into your operating account you have things like, I don't know if this individual would have direct deposit attached to, so there's a lot of logistics that would go into play. If you typically run a payroll through an operating account, and now you're trying to take the funds out of the PPP loan account, but that's not necessary. One transfer of the payroll cost, the eligible payroll cost, from the PPP loan account to the operating account would be sufficient. You could do that every period. You could do that every month, whatever you need to do. And your support for that is your payroll report, because in the end of the day, when you submit the application for forgiveness, you're submitting a payroll report, and it's not going to matter which bank account it came out of. But keeping it separate helps from a tracking standpoint, so you're able to keep a good track on how much money is unutilized at that point. So it is a good practice to set up that separate PPP bank account, but it's not necessary to process that payroll out of that account.
And just to add to that, I think one of the big changes that I've seen with the new application, the new forgiveness application that came out, is that when it comes to payroll, and this is kind of what Gary is alluding to, as far as the documentation that's needed for payroll, if you have a company that does your payroll, like ADP or Paychex or Gusto, all the bank needs is basically that payroll report, along with your maybe a 941 that you would have filed, and that's it. So I think based on the documentation that we need for payroll, I think that the new application, along with some of the new rules, made it easier for us banks to get this information. I don't know, Gary, if you want to comment on that, but that's what I saw when I looked at that new EZ application.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, all the payroll services that they did a great job in the application process, providing the reports needed to process the loan at the get-go. And on the back end of this, I anticipate those same payroll services being able to do the same thing. They can modify those reports to include only your alternative payroll period or your payroll period. And, that should be all the evidence that you need to submit along with the application for forgiveness. So that kind of goes to my point about just making it easy, and instead of, having if you have other costs, of course you have to provide that documentation, but if it's only payroll costs, that one payroll report would be sufficient.
Yeah.
Okay. Kim had a follow-up to her original question, which was about the EIDL loan rather than the grant. She really meant the loan portion of it. So, if her question originally was, if I receive the EIDL loan, will this affect forgiveness for the PPP in any way?
So I'll touch that. Yeah, I'll clarify that a little bit further. So, I mean, you can have an EIDL loan and a PPP loan. Absolutely. You just can't use them both for payroll. That seems to be the limitation. I don't think there's a limitation on other expenses. So if you use PPP loan funds 1 month for payroll, or I'm sorry, if you use PPP loan funds for rent 1 month, and then you use EIDL loan monies the following month, I believe that's okay. I haven't seen anything that says you can't do that. But it's the payroll cost that they don't want you to. I'm pretty sure they don't want you to double calculate. The grant, of course, the grant portion of that you can use for anything. But it's the actual, the EIDL grant you can use for anything, but the EIDL loan, I wouldn't spend that on payroll. I don't think. Gary, do you have a different take on that?
No, I agree with you, Steve. I guess our question is whether or not having the EIDL loan impacts forgiveness. And I agree with what you're saying, is the only way it potentially would impact forgiveness is if you would try to utilize the funds for the same expense, which you wouldn't be allowed to do. So you're allowed to have both the EIDL loan and the PPP loan. You submit an application for forgiveness. In the application for forgiveness, the only reference to the EIDL on that application for forgiveness relates to the grant or the advance that we were talking about, not the loan itself.
Yeah. Yeah. And Kim, if we didn't answer that right, maybe you could jump on and, you know, if we're not hitting what you're asking, you can maybe jump on and ask. But hopefully we got it this time.
Okay, Chrissy, you may have touched base on this. Can you give us a heads up as to what the easy form is asking for in regards to documentation?
So as far as documentation goes, I actually have this pulled up. I'll give you a couple of highlights. I'll give you a couple highlights on this. So as far as payroll goes, you know, again, we've talked about either bank account statements or third-party payroll services, 941 tax forms, state and local earnings report. And then if you're paying health insurance or retirement, you've got to show the employer's contribution to those two items, which again is health insurance or retirement plans. That's for payroll. So as Gary has alluded to a couple times, it is much more streamlined than we thought it was going to be for the payroll. As far as non-payroll costs, for your mortgage, if you're paying mortgage interest with the funds, you would basically need to provide a monthly statement from your bank. So all the months that you would include, you would have to provide that monthly statement. So if you were going to count interest in April, May, and June, you would need to provide your loan statement for April, May, and June. For business rent or lease payments, you need to provide your current lease agreement as well as canceled checks. And for utility payments, invoices and canceled checks. And I guess just one quick side note, I know that a lot of businesses, they might not pay their rent or their utilities via check. They might do bill pay, or they might do like ACH. And if that's the case, you'll just provide your bank statement and you'll highlight the payments that you made. So for your non-payroll, that's the type of documentation that's being looked at.
Okay. David comments, I was told it was okay to include myself, the owner, when I applied for my PPP. I have seen info that if a business is an S Corp, you have to use the long form for forgiveness. Is that correct?
Yeah, I don't believe that's correct. I mean, I think it goes back to the whole point of you can answer the question whether you reduced any annual salary or wages for any employees less than $100,000. So if you can answer the question that you haven't reduced your payroll, I believe you can use the EZ. Another point related to the EZ that Steve was talking about on the previous question is that I don't think the documentation of the EZ is any different than on the loan form. I think the difference is, the calculation related to the full-time equivalents and the salary and hourly wage reductions aren't needed on the EZ form. But as far as S Corp, so S Corp owners, they receive compensation in the form of salaries, and I think they're treated in that respect the same as they would be as other employees. And I'm almost certain you'd be able to use the EZ form in that circumstance.
Yeah, I agree with that. I definitely agree with that. I know that in the information that came out on Monday, there was about, I think it was like 2 pages of information regarding how an owner employee, how much compensation they can claim there was a lot of information written on that, and I actually read through that twice, and I'm still a little hazy on that. But I think that is when the additional guidance came out on Monday. That when you were an owner employee, specifically with an S corporation, it talked a lot about how much your salary had to be limited, but it didn't indicate to me at all that you would have to do the long form.
Okay. How does a 1099 or sole prop business have to show a payroll doc if they don't normally pay themselves that way?
Yeah, good question, Mark. So this is where, again, the EZ form was created for those type of folks. And in that situation, I believe that the documentation that those folks need to provide would just be their Schedule C. So if they submitted a Schedule C, like a final Schedule C when they applied, then I think technically the bank already has that on file, and they should be able to use that to verify, that's what you paid yourself. If you submitted a draft Schedule C, then you would need to submit your final Schedule C. But that's, I think that's really about it. Gary, do you have a different take on that?
Well, maybe a little bit. I know the guidance that came out talked about the maximum amount that an individual who's self-employed could have forgiven, and that amount is $20,833. And the way they calculated that amount is $100,000 divided by 12 months times 2.5 months, gets you to $20,833. Now, you would need that income on your Schedule C from 2000, at least that amount of income on your Schedule C from 2019 to allow you to do that. The other take I have on that, though, Steve, is I've seen some guidance, maybe non-authoritative guidance, that says that sole proprietors should make disbursements out of their business account to prove that they're paying themselves that amount. Have you seen anything in that regard, Steve?
You know what? Absolutely. I've definitely, that's really a lot of guidance I've been giving folks is, yes, you want to at least show that you're making a distribution out of your business account. Yeah, I think that's absolutely, it's almost like an unwritten rule to an extent.
Yeah. So I think that's probably something that I would document and be able to provide the bank if I'm a sole proprietor submitting the application for forgiveness, proof that you did make those distributions to yourself to count that as part of the forgiveness application.
Yeah, and again, just to be clear, that would specifically pertain to sole proprietors, 1099s, independent contractors, those type of folks.
All right. Jennifer says, employees are limited to $100,000 annually for the forgiveness calculation. Originally, for the 8-week period, an employee was limited to $15,384 of eligible wages. Since the weeks have been extended to 24, are those same employee wages eligible to a maximum of $46,152? Is it any way different for employee/owner?
Yeah, that's the question there. Yeah, so I absolutely agree that the $46,152, which is for non-owner employees, that's the maximum amount, because that's based on $100,000 divided by 52 weeks times 24 weeks. Okay, that's how you get that number. The question that I haven't been able to get full clarification on yet is if you're an S Corp owner and you make over $100,000, is that amount, that $46,154, pertaining to you, or are you subject to the $20,833 amount that we talked about previously? Steve, I don't know if you have any answer on that.
Yeah, so that's the part of the guidelines that came out on Monday that I alluded to earlier that I've read twice, and I got to be honest with you, it is a little hazy. See, I actually, when I read through that, Gary, I got the impression that that the owners, that it's like like if you were an S corporation, if you were an owner employee of an S corporation, you were capped at 20,833, no matter if you were 8 weeks or 24 weeks. But then if you were a partnership or a C corp, if you were the owner in a partnership, and again, I think there has to be a clarity here. When we say a partnership, that means that you're filing a 1065. You know, I know people sometimes consider there's some partnerships, but you're really an S corporation. You got to really look at your tax forms here. So if you're a 1065 filing partnership, or you're a C corporation, those folks, I thought, to me, the way I interpreted the ruling is that they had more flexibility to be able to count more income toward themselves. Whereas S corporations, I got the impression that you were more limited. But that's my best take on it. I don't know. I could be wrong.
Yeah, this all came out earlier this week, and I think it's still being interpreted. And I've seen it go a couple different ways in a couple different sources. But I am 100% sure about the 46,152 on non-employees, the max for non-employees that have compensation over $100,000. The gray area there is the 20,833 or up to 46,000 if you're an owner of an S. And that'll be, believe me, there'll be more guidance, and there'll be some clarity here in the next week or two. And, you know, we can always communicate that as we find out more information.
Yeah.
Okay. Another follow-up from Kim. Thanks. The answer helped for first question. The second question on the idle loan, can I pay off past debt with it? It's a low interest loan. So can I use it like any other loan, or does it have to be used for only debt incurred during COVID period?
See, the way that I read the idle loan documents is that you could not pay off debt with those funds. That's how I interpreted it. I don't know, Gary, have you seen idle loan documents or and seen something different?
No, that's what I've seen, Steve. But I guess the point is, you know, you can utilize idle loans for a lot of operating expenses. Maybe there's a way you could utilize it for operating expenses and utilize other sources to pay off the loan. So indirectly, you're getting that loan paid off. If you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah, that's actually that's a real good point. And I actually had a client say that. Now that I think about this, I had a client say that to me last week, which is basically, you know, they use their idle funds to make all their, you know, rent payments and utility payments and you know, just general operating expenses.
Just purchasing inventory and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah. But then by doing that, they're able to free up their cash that they can then turn around and use to pay off debt. So
yeah,
even though you're not doing it directly, that is a way you could probably do it indirectly.
Okay. Christy says, I'll be paying my employees a final PPP bonus next week to wrap up the 8 weeks, and all they've done to stay in compliance. Can I include the owner in the extra bonus, even if it will take them over the $1,900 basically allowed per week during the 8-week period?
Barry, you got any thought on that one? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, I think regardless, though, the owner is going to be capped at the amount. Well, that said, we haven't really come to a conclusion about what the owner's compensation could be capped at. So, you know, I'm advising my clients to basically utilize it in a consistent manner as they have in the past. I mean, if you've paid bonuses in the past, you can pay bonuses. And another point to be made about the 8 and 24 week period of time. I know a lot of people are really anxious to use it in the 8 week period of time. And, you know, if there is gray area there, I would consider trying to just stretch it out and use it over a longer period of time. And then there's no question about whether you can do something in that regard.
Good point. In the guidance that I've received from the SBA, on Monday. One of the things they talk about a lot is that they don't want the owners of businesses to get a cash windfall from this program. The government really, and they use the word windfall. That's not my word, it's theirs. They use it quite a bit when talking about the owner compensation portion. They really wanted the loan proceeds to go to the employees. So I think if you're trying to bonus out an owner, even if an owner is an employee, I think you have to be a little bit careful there. Because I think as Gary alluded to, as we get more guidance, I think that what you could bonus out an owner is, like I said, it's going to be limited. So I'd be a little bit careful with that going over a threshold.
Okay. Ed's talking about a current question here. I thought no long-term debt, but current liabilities is okay.
I think that's in regards to the idle loan, I think. And I would say that there's some accuracy to that, because you can consider, and Gary could probably speak to this better than I can, but I mean, you could consider, a vendor, that you haven't made a payment to. I mean, that's a current liability. And yes, I would think that you could use your idle loan to pay that.
Yeah, I agree, Steve. I mean, current liabilities, I say yes. I think where the gray area is and where the cutoff is paying off debt, long-term debt that's not current. In a sense, refinancing it with your idle loan, that's what's not allowed.
Okay. All right, that concludes our questions. How about a little closing comment from each of you, if you don't mind?
Yeah, I'll start off, and I don't know if Matt can comment or not, but two things that I have read about in the newspaper, and I just wanted to get his take on maybe if the legislature is moving on this at all. But I've read a lot, and this is something we talked about between us bankers at a meeting we had on Wednesday, which is, could PPP loans under 150,000 just be automatically forgiven? I wanted to get Matt's take on that and see if he knows, or if maybe he's heard about that, or if his constituents are talking a lot about that. I'd like to maybe hear Matt's take on that.
I've heard it brought up. I'm not aware of any specific legislation on it yet that's going to amend the CARES Act to say that. I'll get on the phone with our financial legislative aid though after this. I can ask them if there's anything that's coming down the pike with that. There was a lot of talk in the HEROES Act about amending some of the things, but I don't think any of that made it into the bill. I'm not aware of anything specific right now, but I have heard that as a concern that some people want that to be taken, have the government to take a look at that. But yeah, I can get you some details.
And Matt, I'll throw one other question at your way, which is, and it was Dave, excuse me, it was Dave's question from the very beginning, which was, do you think that the government might allow businesses? Are there anything in like the HEROES bill or some other bill that might be coming down the pike that will allow business owners to apply for a second PPP loan based on some type of circumstance?
I haven't heard the language of PPP loan. I've heard hazard pay. That's in the HEROES Act. I've heard other types of pay for employees that were in certain industries. As far as applying for another PPP, no, not specifically that language. Okay. I'm not aware of anything about that. No. Just the only thing in the HEROES Act that was it would be like the stimulus check part 2, like another stimulus check that was in the HEROES Act, which hasn't passed Congress yet, by the way. That's still in the Senate. But that nothing specifically on another PPP.
Awesome. Well, Matt did my closing comments for me. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Matt. Matt is he's one of the congressional folks in Congressman Reschenthaler's office, so we thank him for joining us as usual. Just so everybody's aware of who that mysterious Matt McCoick is. So, thanks, Matt.
Yeah.
All right, Gary.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my comments are, first of all, I appreciate the opportunity to speak into your group. This is helpful for me to understand what the questions are out there, so I can help my clients and help anyone that has any questions regarding this. But this is such a unique time, and I think the whole idea of the PPP was to get money in the hands of businesses, and as we can see, it's accomplished that, and things have been changing over the last couple of months, and I think they'll continue to change. And I think that's why it's important to have these kind of discussions. This isn't the end of it, right? There'll be more changes along the way, and once they come along, we'll try to get the information out available to our clients and to groups like this. But appreciate the opportunity to speak to everyone, and this is great.
Yeah, and thank you, Gary, for jumping on. Much appreciated.
Gary, are you willing to put your paycheck on the fact that there'll be more changes?
Absolutely. I mean, there's no doubt there'll be changes. Yeah.
Just checking.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks again, Steve, Gary, and Matt. Appreciate taking time out of your busy schedules, especially for all of you guys who put your comments in there about all your thank yous. You're very welcome. And of course, I have to, without these guys, it would be, it would be unbelievable. We wouldn't be able to do any of this. So we appreciate it. Obviously, we got a holiday coming up. Want to wish everybody, a happy and safe 4th. We'll keep you updated to see when we'll continue the program. So please keep your eyes out. If you're already here, you guys will be sending you an email, so you'll know what's happening in the future. Just so everybody knows, the chamber is open for business. The physical office is not, though. So the best way to get in touch with us is by email, info@ptcoc.org, or the phone 724-941-6345. You can always check our Facebook page to see what's happening as well. So we will hopefully have the recording of the webinar up later today or tomorrow, and you can get that at ptcoc.org. And I would be remiss, anybody today or who listens to this in the future, if you're not a member of the chamber, we'd love to have you aboard. Just shoot us an email or give us a call. Again, thanks to Steve, Gary, Matt, and all of you for joining us today. Stay well, my friends.